Osama Bin Laden, the man who shook the world. But here's what most people don't talk about. When he disappeared after 9/11, he didn't go alone. He dragged his wives and children into the shadows with him. They moved through secret compounds, hid behind fake identities, always staying 2 steps ahead of the armies. Then, in 2011, his story ended with that terrible night. But what about the family he left behind? The answer might surprise you. Welcome back to Never Ending Celebrities. First, let's talk about the woman who knew Osama Bin Laden before the world did. Najwa Ghanem was born 1958 in Latakia, Syria, into a conservative Yemeni-Syrian family. Her parents, Ibrahim and Nabida, raised her in a traditional household with her 5 siblings. Her childhood was quiet and deeply religious, where Najwa grew up with values that emphasized obedience, modesty, and family honor. However, in 1974, when she was just 15, her life was handed over to her 17-year-old cousin. It wasn't just that they were brought together, but from a duty every woman needed to do. Back then, Osama bin Laden was a quiet, religious schoolboy who hadn't yet shown the world the darkness he would become. But little did Najwa know that she had just become the first of Osama's eventual 6 wives. Over the next 2 decades, she gave birth to 11 of his children, including her sons Abdullah, Abdul Rahman, Saad, and Omar. In those early years, their life was calm. They lived in Saudi Arabia. Osama was studying, and slowly he began drifting towards something deeper and darker. By the late 1980s, Osama had fully thrown himself into the chaos of the Soviet-Afghan War, joining the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. But while he chased conflict and ideology, Najwa stayed behind in Saudi Arabia, raising their children on her own. Eventually, love, loyalty, or maybe fear, it pulled her back in, and she followed him. But things were about to take a turn for the worst. The year was 1991, and everything changed for Najwa. Osama was expelled from Saudi Arabia for his political activities, and from that moment on, exile became their new reality. Soon, Najwa and Osama moved to Sudan, where they spent several years living in harsh conditions because Osama always refused anything that looked like comfort, not out of necessity, but by choice. Their homes were stripped to the bone, with no electricity and none of the basic appliances that are bare minimum to make a living. Najwa was the glue that was holding everything together. Najwa wasn't just the wife of the man chasing war. She was a mother, clinging to the edges of normalcy, protecting her children from a future she couldn't see, but could already feel coming. By 1996, they returned to Afghanistan. However, by now even this wasn't home. It was just another fortress, cold and completely guarded. Osama was mostly gone. Rather, he was just present to his family, and when he appeared, he only gave orders, not affection. However, between all of this, what one does not realize is that Najwa was losing faith and affection for her husband. By the year 2000, Najwa had spent more than 25 years by his side. Despite such a long marriage, she no longer felt safe. Her sons, especially Omar, were urging her to leave. Just before the September 11th attacks, Najwa made the decision to leave. Does that mean Najwa knew about the 9/11 attack that was just about to happen and chose her safety over her marriage? Did she warn Osama about the terror that could have followed? Between September 7th and 9th of 2001, she quietly left Afghanistan with some of her children and never returned. Sources suggest she was living in Damascus with her son Abdul Rahman. Najwa never opened up publicly about her marriage or her life as the mother of 11 children, until that is 2009, when she co-wrote Growing Up Bin Laden with her son Omar and author Jean Sassoon. In the book, she described the isolation, the fear, and even Osama's intense physical side, calling him a sex machine when he returned from his long absences. The world was shocked, but for Najwa, it was just the truth she could never deny. Najwa Ghanem now lives quietly in Qatar, far from the life she was pulled into. She's keeping a low profile, watching the world judge the man she once called her husband. But not every wife stayed in the shadows. Khadija Sharif was Osama bin Laden's second wife, and the only one who made a decision that would separate her from his legacy forever. Born in Saudi Arabia, Khadija wasn't just another quiet figure in the background. She was educated, outspoken, and deeply involved in Islamic education. Before she ever crossed paths with Osama, she had already built a life of her own, working as a respected university lecturer. In a world where women were expected to stay silent, she stood apart. When they both got married in 1983, Osama was just beginning to mold his extremist beliefs into something more dangerous. At first, their life together was relatively ordinary, at least by Bin Laden standards. Soon, they had 3 children named Ali, Aisha, and Amer. And at that time, she was also known as Ali, a respectful title meaning Mother of Ali, but this was never a fairy tale. Khadija followed Osama from Saudi Arabia to Sudan, where he had gone into self-imposed exile in the early 1990s, where their lifestyle changed dramatically. Osama bin Laden had already given up his luxurious inheritance, and now the family lived in increasingly harsh and isolated conditions, with surviving struggles. According to Osama's former bodyguard, Abu Jandal, Khadija tried to hold things together. She even took on the role as an Islamic educator in Sudan, teaching families around her. But over time, the emotional weight grew heavier. Osama was slipping deeper into radicalism, and Khadija was left raising children under a man who was becoming colder, more obsessed, and increasingly absent. In the 1990s, when his power was growing and escape was nearly impossible, she did something unthinkable. She asked for a divorce. In Osama's world, that wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. But Khadija didn't hesitate. She left the compound, ideology, and walked away from the life she once shared with him. And with that, she disappeared from his story. There is little public trace of Khadija after the separation. Some say she returned to Saudi Arabia. Others believe she relocated quietly somewhere else in the Middle East, but no one knows for sure. Khadija didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't give interviews, write memoirs, or try to reclaim her place in history. But her silence speaks volumes, because long before the world knew Osama bin Laden's name, Khadija Sharif chose to walk away and never looked back. However, history doesn't always remember the quiet ones. Sometimes, the quiet ones stay the longest, see the most, and carry secrets that never make the headlines. Khairia was one of them, the third wife of Osama bin Laden, and perhaps the one who stood by him until the very end. She wasn't a teenage bride and a sheltered housewife. Khairia was a scholar, a child psychologist with a PhD in Islamic studies, a highly educated woman from a respected Saudi family. Her background set her apart from the others, and so did her age. She was 7 years older than Osama, and according to those who knew her, she brought a kind of structure to his chaotic life, a calm that the others didn't. In 1985, during Osama's early rise in the jihadi movements, he married Khairia. She didn't chase comfort or visibility. In fact, she rarely appeared at all. But in the background, her presence was constant. Her faith ran deep. And some say she shared Osama's radical ideology even more intensely than the younger women who came after her. Khairia and Osama bin Laden had only one child, Hamza bin Laden, the one often referred to as Osama's chosen heir. But what truly set Khairia apart wasn't just her age or education, it was her decision to stay. So, why did she remain by his side even when others found a way out? Najwa walked away before the world caught fire, carrying her children and pieces of life she couldn't hold together. Khadija chose the harder path. She wanted her freedom and broke away from the grip of a man turning into something darker. Yet Khairia, she remained, not because she had to, but because something inside of her believed in him, or at least in the mission he never let go of. While the world crumbled and even love turned into fear, she refused to walk away. Whether it was devotion, denial, or a kind of faith only she understood, she still stayed, even when it cost her everything. In May 2011, when US forces stormed the Abbottabad compound, Khairia was inside, one of the last people still living under Osama bin Laden's roof. She survived the raid, but not the silence that came after. Pakistani authorities took her into custody, and since then, she has rarely been seen or heard. For some, she was the quiet anchor in his final years, and for others, she was so deeply tied to his cause that her silence still seems louder. But whatever the truth was, one thing remained. She was there at the end of his life, at the quiet close of a chapter that shook the world. Siham Sabar was surviving beside Osama Bin Laden. She was holding her breath through a life she never truly chose. Siham was a Saudi woman with a strong academic background, known for teaching Arabic grammar. Before her world narrowed down to compounds and whispered relocations, she had her own space, her own rhythm. Even in the early years, when they lived in Sudan during the 1990s, Siham didn't fully disappear into his world. She continued teaching at a university and reportedly moved between Sudan and Saudi Arabia, as if trying to preserve the fragments of the life she once had. But that version of life slowly thinned out. As Osama bin Laden's world turned dangerous, Siham's world became smaller. There were no press conferences, no grand statements, just long days in unfamiliar places, raising children in the shadow of someone else's war. She became a mother of 5, but also a bystander to unfolding extremism. The world outside knew her name, but not her thoughts. And that was the most painful part, that being part of a storm you didn't start, yet couldn't escape. By the time May 2011 arrived, she was inside the house in Abbottabad, Pakistan, the same compound where bin Laden would meet his end. Siham survived the operation, but what she walked out with was more than just bruises and questions. It was the aftermath of years lived under pressure that no one else truly saw. She was then taken into custody by Pakistani authorities, along with Osama's other surviving wives. After everything she witnessed, the fear, the loss, and the final moments, what kind of life did she return to? Today, it is believed she lives in Saudi Arabia with her children, far from the noise of the world that once orbited her husband's name. She doesn't speak publicly, and maybe she never will. The trauma she carries, the years she endured, and the fear that she swallowed, those things don't fade with time. She lives quietly, the way she always did. In the end, it wasn't just Osama bin Laden who lived in the shadows. There were his wives and his children too. In their whole life, they crossed borders in silence, dodging drones and living in the blur of secrecy and fear. Their fate was marked by blood, control, and a sacrifice they never asked for, all in the name of family. After his death, the women he left behind scattered across the world. Some were detained, and others were deported. All of them tried to rebuild something that resembled a normal home in their own quiet way. They settled into places where no one whispered his name, hoping their children would finally grow up in peace. So, what do you think about their story? Were they victims, involved, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this made you see things differently, then don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started. And there's a lot more coming your way soon.